nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars. Don't let them end.
Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of our planet's hottest entertainment with an edge from a galaxy far, far away. Jaime En Fuego here, welcoming you once again to another installment of Enfuegotainment, my namesake program, and you can just call me Fuego for short. And this is another brief bit of canon coverage, that's right. So yes, we are indeed past Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and as some may know, the bits of disdain that I had for aspects of it. We even have recent, just an immense discussion that I still have yet to properly, actually do a video and comment about Duel of the Fates, what Episode 9 could have been had Carrie Fisher unfortunately not succumbed to her inner demons of sorts, and we got Colin Trevorrow's initial idea to close out that trilogy. But that is not what I am here to talk about, and yes, we don't have Mando, and we're not quite yet at the 7th and final season of the Clone Wars that is coming to Disney Plus in February, so this is like that little in-between phase where I took the time to read another novel that is in canon since Disney took things over, and that is none other than Tarkin by James Luceno. Now, Tarkin, that's right, the Grand Moff himself, but just the whole, Moff title and stuff, I was not completely aware as somebody who knows Star Wars fairly well, but just is really getting into so much more of this deeper sort of classification and coverage and stuff like that since the mouse bought Lucasfilm. And yes, I recently before this read Lords of the Sith, which was quite compelling, and I am very fascinated by this period, pre A New Hope and Episode 4, the original Star Wars, and yet post Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3, and just all of the inner workings and the transitions, across the galaxy at that particular time, and just the transition from the Republic into the Imperial Empire, and how separatists who, almost got double-crossed into thinking they were going to change things around, and then were left with nothing any better, when there was, Palpatine, just ascending to a higher power, and all this other fascinating stuff, and everything that was going on in the Outer Regions at the time, and so on and so forth, or Outer Rim, whatever they call it. I'm trying to remember specifically, but yes. So James Luceno wrote this all about Tarkin, and just getting a very interesting sense for not only his ruthlessness, not only just how adept and cunning he was. It's very fascinating, and he's not a character that I can really attest to being that captivated by in the original Star Wars film. It was all about Vader. It was all about, different monsters that we saw, whether it was, back on Tatooine or, whatever else. And so, yeah, he was a character that, especially when I was a lot younger, was a little bit more throwaway. And so it was fascinating to just get an additional, just in a non-spoiler fashion here, as I'm not going to give you like every single detail of this because I want you to read it, because it was very masterfully done in a lot of ways, but just to get some background, some backstory, and just know how he factored into not only the construction of the Death Star that he planned and then played a massive part in, but also the fact that he had respect for Vader and yet had a lot of apprehension about Palpatine, and he has interactions with both of them in this book, but we also get an extensive amount of flashbacks, and these flashbacks go to, his just upbringing, in the Outer Rim area of sorts, and really more so than anything, seeing that he grew up in a place where, he enjoyed privilege, and yet also had almost like a coming of age, like, just when your manhood, so to speak, aspect, where, after having a very pampered, existence up until a particular point in his life, he was forced to go out with his uncle and others and experience, what his home planet really had to offer as far as, nasty wildlife, and he goes on like almost like some sort of safari of sorts to more or less prove himself as a man that is ready to go into, the full extent of like military training and so on. And yeah, he rises through the ranks quite quickly, as we find out through these proverbial flashbacks. Yeah, and he even, like, we get some stuff which is really cool about him actually during the Clone Wars, because remember, so many of these people were fighting on the same side as the Jedis during the Clone Wars before, Order 66 and all of that stuff went through, and suddenly everything was turned on its head. And so yes, he even has recollections of fighting with Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars and all of those different Jedis and stuff like that, and how, he was just such a badass at times that, he even impressed a lot of them. And we get so many inner workings from his head of not only distrust, of certain people, without going into massive amounts of it. I already mentioned Palpatine, so that bit is already right off the bat, but also his intuition that he does indeed think that Vader is Anakin Skywalker, though he has no means of confirmation. And there's an amusing line that comes forward time and time again in this about, like at the very beginning of the story, Tarkin is basically, he's stuck on this planet that he thinks is almost like a punishment because it's this remote area, and there is this this droid kind of like spaceship attack, and they think it's like remnants of the Separatists. And just hearing the amount of politics that were still in play as the transition was happening from Republic to the Imperial Empire and everything, it's really dope. And if you're into the just all of those inner workings of how the changes were transpiring, and the fact that there were a lot of people, especially on Coruscant, whether they were reporters, whether they were, former like scientists and doctors and medical people, all of these different things, that really is how some of those people aided with former Separatists to form this rebellion. And they actually steal Tarkin's ship at one point in this, and him and Vader are on this mission together. Their ship gets stolen. Tarkin's ship specifically, as I mentioned, Vader and Tarkin go on this just revenge mission, almost trying to take that back. There is fear that there is a mole that has actually been at work for quite some time, a mole in the actual Imperial Empire that has aided this separatist rebellion, which has risen from, dissenters from the new empire back on Coruscant that I was mentioning, and then also former separatists and how they're combining their forces. And it's just really quite interesting and intriguing to see just all of these little pieces coalescing together. And yet also, the fact that, Tarkin, as I mentioned at the very beginning, he still is doing his own thing and has his own ideas that he believes are beyond all others, even those above him, as he is just like a governor rank at this particular time after being more or less demoted. And he's redesigning this uniform, and it's something he hears as a kid, and it's something that he hears, once again, or it at least sparks the flashback. And it's the phrase of, well, that uniform will look a whole lot better with some blood on it. And it's a cool, very profound phrase that is used a few different times in the book. And yeah, I mean, it's an acquired taste, I suppose, being into these well, I mean, it was previously called the Expanded Universe, then Legends, and these are in-canon novels, and I did like a lot of what is considered Legends, but I still think that Luceno, who did a lot of the New Jedi Order stuff, if I remember correctly, he also did the Dark Plagueis book, which is not canon, unfortunately, at least as far as, the new, reclassification and reappropriatizing and everything that happened after Disney bought stuff, but, yeah, I mean, the Plagueis novel is one that I still want to go back to, just like I enjoy going back to, Heir to the Empire and, all the stuff that, was done when they were trying to do a proper sequel trilogy with The Last Command and all of that stuff. So I have wanted to read Plagueis, or Plagueis, or, whatever is the proper terminology. I think it's Plagueis, if I remember, and I just watched Revenge of the Sith a few months ago, so what am I saying here? But yeah, it's late as I'm filming this, having recently finished it and everything, and it is still a very if you want to dive deeper into the history of characters that didn't really have that much limelight and didn't really have as much of a time to shine because they either got killed or they were just minor characters or whatever. That is one cool thing, and Luceno does do a very good job. It's deep in its military strategy, which is put forth in a lot of the situations that Tarkin finds himself in. It's interesting the mutual respect that we get from him and Vader, his suspicions of who Vader is, as I mentioned earlier, and all of that, and also his apprehensions and just lack of respect and disregard for some things with regards to Palpatine, and the fact that he's almost like he's not so much playing multiple sides, so to speak, but I mean, he is very much ultimately out for himself and also out to, kind of similar to the whole Dooku aspect, to look out for his home world in that regard. And yes, there is the similar plot point of the fact that there is also an Imperial dissenter / mole, so to speak, in the previous canon novel that I read, The Lords of the Sith. But I mean, I don't know, as we segue into a 7th and final season of the Clone Wars, I really dig jumping into this stuff that takes place around the Clone Wars 2 / through Rebels era of the in-canon stuff, and it's super dope. I'm a big fan of it, and yeah, that's about the extent of what I can divulge without really going into extensive spoilery details. But yes, I mean, Luceno also did, as I should mention, Catalyst, a Rogue One story, which kind of forms some additional backstory and post-story involving a lot of the characters from Rogue One. That's the next one of Luceno's that I am very stoked to check out, because of the fact that Rogue One is still my favorite thing that has been done since Mr. Mouse picked up the IP and everything Lucasfilm has to offer and involves. And so yeah, I mean, this there's interesting ruthlessness, there's cunning, calculated connivingness, and yes, all of those are just, if there's selling points to you, it's not a massive read. I want to say it's really only like 300, yeah, and the paperback version alone is just a little bit over 300 pages, so it's something you can breeze through. There's also audio versions of it on, I believe, Audible, audiobooks.com, and if you're a subscriber to Scribd, SCRIBD.com, they are essentially the streaming Netflix service of audiobooks. So yeah, and all of the Star Wars stuff is done almost like the versions in the 90s of Shadows of the Empire and Heir to the Empire and so many others that I thought were super cool, because of the fact that it's not full-on audio drama, where there's multiple voice actors and all this other stuff, but it does retain sound effects. And at least our primary narrator and reader, whatever you want to classify them as, throwing their voice in various ways, and altering pitches and tone and inflection, just to give all of these different characters and internal just monologue and narration and stuff like that as well distinctiveness. And it's very cool, and it's not just somebody reading a story. It is, in a lot of ways, after the heart of those audio dramas of the 90s that were so popular and that I loved so much. And yes, I did, besides reading, a good chunk of it, I listened to a lot of it as well. And I enjoyed both very thoroughly. And so if you want to learn more about Grand Moff Tarkin and just his backstory, his upbringing, and his young days as a cadet, and also this takes place 14 years before A New Hope, and I think like 3 or 4 years after Revenge of the Sith, maybe it's 5, but nonetheless, the flashbacks, obviously, they jump much further back. But that is a thing with so many of these Star Wars novels that I've noticed, especially the newer in-canon ones. Dooku did it extensively, really extensively, as a matter of fact, as did Master and Apprentice. So I like the time jumping. The time jumping allows you to get more bearing and context and motivation for a lot of these characters. And yeah, the Claudia Gray one that I just mentioned is also another one of my personal favorites that I've read in the last year. But that being a newer novel, that's the one that came out in 2019, early 2019. It's a pre-episode 1 story, so I like them filling in all of these gaps about characters. I mean, Qui-Gon is only in 1 film, and you know, he is given significant justice in Master and Apprentice, and it's very cool to see the other side of the coin / spectrum of sorts and get more about you know, really the most powerful person presumably in A New Hope, even if later on we find out, yes, there was an emperor above those things, as far as being one of the main orchestrators behind the construction and in turn the demise of the Death Star. Yeah, if you're into that and you want to hear more about Tarkin, Luceno did a terrific job with this. So, I've been Jaime En Fuego. Y'all can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. I've done a lot of Star Wars coverage in this last year, and it's not going to be letting up, even though we are no longer in the year of 19 where we were, you know, anticipating so immensely and heavily J.J. Abrams Episode 9. I may have been disappointed by it. If you loved it, to each their own. Art is subjective, as I all too often say. You can find a rapid reaction that I did immediately after opening night, and then also a lengthier spoilers discussion with some co-hosts of mine from none other than The Horror Show. That's right, youtube.com/The Horror Show channel. That's where we do at least 1 episode a day, and in some instances 2. Yes, bits of scarific coverage, whether trailer reactions, film reviews. We are just about to put up our review of the color in the space, I want to say, if I'm not butchering the title, but it's a new Richard Stanley film. He was the director of Hardware and almost The Island of Dr. Moreau. But yeah, it's his new film from Spectre Vision, based on the H.P. Lovecraft story. It was a visual treat and very interesting, but we also have reviews of The Turning, lots of other stuff, video game Let's Plays, unboxings, yeah, you name it, lots of coolness. And then lastly, every Monday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, yes, Will Escridia's YouTube channel, myself, CP the showrunner over there, and Lindsay Mimsy, as I so affectionately call that awesome-ass dude, from My 2 Cents of Nonsense. We have a program called Show Business. That's right, Show Business is a breakdown of weekend box office numbers from the previous weekend, look ahead and make some predictions to the upcoming, and lastly have a little bit of palaver about some of the biggest entertainment news stories in the film world from the previous week. So, I'm En Fuego. Y'all have been awesome, obviously. And until the Reel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos, constant viewers and readers, obviously, in this case. But I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this, in this case, book palaver sooner rather than later. And yes, until then, may the Force be with you always, even if you get a mop on your ass.